här avsnittet då som kommer här, det handlar ju om tidstecken och hur snabbt vi närmar oss ändens tid. Och det står i skriften ifrån första Thessalonikerbrevet 50 kapitel som just handlar om ändens tid, så står det: släck inte anden, förakta inte profetior eller profetiskt tal, som den här videon nu kommer att handla om. Men pröva allt, står det, och det gör vi rätt i. Och det säger Johannes också i sitt brev. Vet ni, det står det ju att vi ska pröva alla andar. Och vi ska behålla det goda, alltså det som är ljus då. Och vi ska hålla oss borta från all slags ont. Dra er alltså undan allt som är av mörker. Så jag upplever att det här jag lagt ut nu, det är värt att testas. För det stämmer väldigt väl med vad vi ser utvecklas just nu. Men som sagt var, pröva allt.
News right now, LifeSite News, many other sites. You know, Revelation 13:16 through 17 says, and he shall cause all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. It's a global economic sanctioning system that's being created right now. We're watching precursors in many different ways that will be used to economically sanction individuals to get them to bow down to the edicts of the world governing body. And folks, let me tell you, they're very intricately putting this thing together so that people will not be able to escape it. And I know that there will be nations that will not be part of this and that will resist it, but most of the nations on the earth will come in complete alliance with this, and they'll bow down to it. They'll yield up their sovereignty to it. Let me give you one example. LifeSite News reported, this is the title of the article if you want to go read it. I posted it on my Facebook page earlier today. A top economist said that central bankers are planning on putting CBDCs, or central bank digital currency implants, under your skin. That's the ultimate goal. Now remember, the Bible says in the end time this world governing body is going to put a mark in your right hand and your forehead. Without that, you're not going to be able to buy or sell. You're not going to be able to participate in society. I'm quoting a couple quotes from this article, and then I've got a video for you to watch. A prominent German economist, Richard Werner, says central banks are planning to concretize central bank digital currencies in the form of microchips. He says that's their ultimate goal. And they're going to be implanted under the skin. That's what they'd like to do. A technology that would enable absolute government control over personal finances. Now, John prophesied this 2,000 years ago, and here we are. This guy's talking about it. Listen at this. He actually says, I was taught by a central banker that the central bank digital currencies will look like a small grain of rice that they want to put under your skin. And, of course, this is Professor Richard Werner, who devised the now widely used and, according to Werner, abused bank practice of quantitative easing. And in a recent interview with Ivor Cummins, he tells this, and I want you to see a clip about this now, just a moment here. I want you to understand what you're going to see. He talks about how this central banker told him this and what they're planning on doing with it. So let's listen to the clip real quick.
Because the technology was really ready around 2015 to roll out. Mm. And what people don't mention is, what do these CBDCs actually look like? You know, at the moment, there's a bit of talk about this being phone-based apps. And yes, that is the initial phase. But what was already ready around 2015 is the ultimate goal. What they really want, apparently, I was told by a central banker, is, you know, CBDCs looks like a small grain of rice that they want to put under your skin, which is, in my view, a violation of human dignity. And they realize there is a hurdle. So to get people to accept this, there will be, you know, why suddenly are the billionaires saying, let's have universal basic income? Because the story is going to be, oh, now you've created this vast unemployment and disruption and crises. Well, we need universal basic income. You will get 2,000 euros into your account every month. But of course, to run this efficiently, we need to use the latest technology. So, you know, you need the CBDC chip implant. But how many people will say, okay, fine, 2,000 pounds, 2,000 euros, you know?
A surprising proportion, shockingly, obviously, to me or yourself, but we've seen years ago in Sweden, there has been a substantial small minority take-up of what's currently much larger. It's kind of like a little cylinder in stainless steel, I guess. Maybe it's titanium or something. And they're doing it because they just want to. They want to be early adopters of this nonsense. So if anyone's listening and that sounds fanciful or conspiracy theorish, the fact is in Sweden they are taking it up and in other places, and that's not coming out of nowhere. That's not just some local tech firm makes this. You know, it's the early adoption kind of tendrils coming out from the mothership. So yeah, interesting times ahead.
Now, do y'all understand what they're talking about here? He said that the technology to roll out these CBDCs, that was ready in 2015, but they've got to set everybody up. They've got to get the right crisis put in place. They've got to get inflation. They've got to get all these different crises set up so that people will be willing to do that. And he also said that what they're proposing possibly is to give out these universal basic incomes. You've heard about that, where a state or a government would give out so much money to somebody. He said 2,000 euros potentially, 2,000 euros a month. And everybody's going to say, well, hey, 2,000 euros a month, I want that, right? Universal basic income. But it will come in the form of a central bank digital currency, and they'll say for you to have access to that, then you need to make sure you comply with our edicts. Now, on my Facebook page, David Robbins, go look at it. I posted on End Time 1000. You can go watch this video. And he actually talks about them using these things to coerce people. If you're a dissenter, if you talk against the government or you talk against this CBDC plan, then they can cut your ability to have access to that off. And so it's very important that we understand what these CBDCs are all about, because these are things that we're going to have to wrestle with. Joe Biden would love to implement them here in the United States. He's a globalist. He agrees with the world government. He agrees with yielding up our sovereignty. Now, he would never tell you that. The liberal nightly news is never going to tell you that. But that's really what we're facing right now. It's everything.
You're responsible for discovering the blood moon tetrads. And, you know, the book of Joel talks about blood moons. Jesus said there'd be signs in the sun, moon, and stars and all of that. But your book here, Blood Moons, Decoding the Imminent Heavenly Signs, how on earth did you find out about the blood moon tetrads?
It was a miracle. It really was. I love astronomy, and so I was looking at the eclipses, and I had been praying, and it hit me about 4 in the morning when I was in my prayer closet. I used to love to get up and pray around 4 and 5 in the morning, and I've been doing it for a long time. And I also teach on the Feast of the Lord. And so all of a sudden it hit me, I need to go to NASA's website to look at when these eclipses are occurring on the biblical calendar. Because in Genesis 1:14, many people misunderstand that verse, which is so significant. When we think of why did God create the sun and the moon, we think it was for light. But the Bible says the number one reason, go and look in Genesis 1:14, he created the sun and the moon for signs. And then it says for seasons. Well, the problem is English. When we read the word season, we think of winter, spring, summer, or fall. But that Hebrew word doesn't mean that. As a matter of fact, in Leviticus 23, when it talks about the feast of the Lord, that word feast, what do we think of when we think of feast? We think of food. Well, it's the same Hebrew word. So how can that Hebrew word, the same one, be translated as food here and winter in Genesis? It doesn't mean either one. It literally means an appointed time. That's why the biblical calendar for the Jewish people was based on the new moon, because it's on the new moon is the only time you can have a solar eclipse. And that's why the feasts like Passover and Tabernacles are on a full moon, because you can only have a lunar eclipse on a full moon. So God's calendar isn't the Muslim calendar, the Gregorian calendar, it's the biblical calendar. And so I made that connection, and then I go back and I look, and you wouldn't believe it. The first blood moon happened on Passover. The next one was on Tabernacles. And there was a solar eclipse on Rosh Hashanah, for heaven's sake, 2 weeks before the other lunar eclipse. And then in the next year, there also was a total lunar eclipse on Passover and Tabernacles. And I just was so shocked. I thought, well, how often does that happen? And I looked, and the time it happened before was 1967 and 68 when Israel captured Jerusalem. And the time before that was when Israel became a nation, 1949, 1950. And the time before that was 1492 when all the Jews were kicked out of Spain. And so I just was blown away, and I knew that it had to mean something. And I would never claim that I knew what it meant, but I knew it had great biblical significance.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just, when I first read your book and began to understand the blood moons, you know, when you read Joel and it says the moon will be turned to blood, the sun will give its light, it's like, you know, the sky is going to fall, you know, I mean, but that's not what it's saying.
No.
It was saying that there will be signs, like Jesus said, in the sun, moon, and stars. And so the blood moon tetrads makes perfect sense, because that's what God does. You know,
exactly.
I mean, and he's so orderly, he's so predictable in that sense. So I want you to talk about the seasons, because you were talking about the feast. Now, one of the things that you teach that is so fascinating is on the Feast of Israel. Okay, so you believe that the Feast of Israel, 7 feasts, 4 in the spring, 3 in the fall, you believe that's a prophetic grid. You believe that that's a prophetic statement about the future, right?
You are exactly right. In Revelation, it talks about those written in the book of the Lamb who's been slain from the foundation of the world, not 2,000 years ago. That means the slaying of the Passover lamb was from the very beginning, from the foundation of the world. As a matter of fact, what I believe the Father said is, look, I'm going to send my son to die. I'm going to determine what day he's going to die. I'm going to determine what time he's going to die. As a matter of fact, I'm going to determine what songs will be sung at his funeral.
Wow.
This is why 1,000 years before Jesus came, King David wrote the funeral hymns that would be sung on the day Yeshua died, because every Passover they sing the Psalms, the Hallel. As a matter of fact, many of your listeners know that they sang a hymn and went over to the Mount of Olives out on that night. I can tell you the words to the song they sang, because they sang Psalm 118 as the last hymn at every Passover Seder. So the very words that they sang before it was betrayed and crucified has the verse, this is the stone the builders have rejected, it's become the headstone of the corner.
Oh my gosh. So you have Passover.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then you have unleavened bread.
Right.
Okay. Which was the burial.
Right.
And then you have first fruits.
Exactly, the resurrection.
All of those have been fulfilled.
On the day.
On the day.
On the very day.
And then you have the Pentecost, which happened 50 days.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the Jewish. And so now those have been fulfilled, but now we have 3 that haven't been fulfilled. And so talk about the blood moons, talk about the significance of the next feast, because we were talking about the last program. This next Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, could be very significant. Talk about that.
Oh, very significant. Now, if your listeners believe the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever, not just in their head, but in their heart, they know he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. If he fulfilled the spring feast to the day of his first coming, he'll fulfill the fall feast to the day of his second coming,
right.
Which is why we need to know when they occur on our calendar. And just like you can't have Pentecost until he rose from the dead, he's not going to rise from the dead until he's buried. And they're not going to bury him until he died. They're going to be fulfilled in order. So the next feast to be fulfilled is the Feast of Trumpets. Well, do we hear anything about trumpets in Revelation? Of course we do. Mm-hmm. And so the next feast, Yom Kippur, is Israel's National Day of Atonement, the very day when their blinders will be removed. They'll realize Yeshua is the Messiah. And then the next feast is the Feast of Tabernacles, where God tabernacles among men for the 1,000-year reign. Now, the Feast of Trumpets, which is the very next one to be fulfilled, okay, it's also known as Yom Teruah, or the Day of the Awakening Blast. That's right. There's all kinds of scriptures that prove the resurrection of the dead, the rapture, if you want to call it that, will happen on Rosh Hashanah.
I mean, some year, we don't know the year.
Some year, I don't set dates. I don't know what year. See, I have no idea. But I know what will happen on Rosh Hashanah some year.
That's amazing. So let me go back to 2014 and 15, because we're talking about the blood moons.
Sure.
This is just such a significant point in time in human history that we're looking at. And what I say to people, Pastor, is, every generation has had a sign or signs. Hitler was there, earthquakes, wars, but we're the only generation that has all the signs.
Exactly.
We have especially Israel, but we have a convergence of all the signs. So going back to Christopher Columbus, who was a Jew, and many people don't know that, but here's the way I've seen the blood moons, because there's 1492, 1493, 1949, 1950, 1967, 1968, and then 2014 and 15. So we understand the first three. But here's the way that I look at it. The 1492 and 1493 was the beginning of God bringing his holy people together. This is the first time since the AD 70 that we see the first beginnings of a gathering there. 1949, 1950 is the Holy Land. The Jews get back the Holy Land. 1967, 1968 is the Holy City of Jerusalem. 2014, 2015 that's the one, to me, is the Holy Temple. There has been, since in the last 3 months, there's been 11,000 Jews ascend the Temple Mount to pray, the most since 2,000 years ago. Okay, and so we're seeing a great activity in Jerusalem, the Temple Institute, the Temple Mount Faithful, different people. So what do you think about the feast of 2014 and 15? What do they mean? Is it significant for the temple? Does it have any other significance?
I think it definitely could be temple related. The way I look at it from hindsight, I did mention this back then as well. But if you remember Joseph's dream, and Joseph was a type of the Messiah, there was 7 years of plenty followed by the 7 years of famine. I believe the 2014-2015 lunar tetrad was a warning of the 7-year cycle. When it ended, we would begin the 7-year famine or tribulation, which is why 2022 is so significant.
Okay, so the Shemitahs, and if you wouldn't mind talking about it again, so this is a Shemitah year that we're in right now.
Yes.
Now, when we say 2021, 2022, the Jewish year begins, and their civil year begins the Rosh Hashanah.
Yes.
In September.
Yes.
Okay, so their new year began in September, and so now between now and next September, this is a Shemitah year. This is the 7th year.
Yes.
And you believe now again that the tribulation has to begin at the beginning of a Shemitah cycle, which is next September.
Exactly. And I have a chart here. One of the things that I want to mention is how significant the first year of a Shemitah cycle is, and which will begin October of next year, right after Rosh Hashanah, because we're in the 7th year. But did you know both temples, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple and Rome destroyed the temple, both in the first year of a Shemitah cycle?
Wow.
So both temples were destroyed then. The 1967 Six-Day War happened in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. The Yom Kippur War happened in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. Israel took out the Iraq nuclear reactor in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. The first Intifada was in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. The Israel-Jordan peace treaty was the first year of a Shemitah cycle. That's when the quartet began that wanted to divide the land. And I believe they represent the four horns in Zechariah that keep the land divided. And then the Gaza war and, of course, the stock market crash also happened the first year of a Shemitah cycle. And then we have the 2014-2015 blood moons, which was the end of a Shemitah cycle going into the beginning of a Shemitah cycle. And one other point I want to make, you can only blow the shofar on the year of in the year of Jubilee. Now, you got to remember, there's 49 years or 7 cycles. The year of Jubilee is always the first year of the next Shemitah cycle.
Right.
Well, 1973 Yom Kippur War, Yom Kippur is the day they blow the shofar announcing the year of Jubilee on Yom Kippur. And then we have the Yom Kippur War. Well, I believe that was probably a Jubilee year, which means next year also is a Jubilee year.
Oh my gosh. So you believe if the tribulation does not begin next year, it has to wait till the next Shemitah cycle?
Exactly. It has to begin because Daniel's Jewish.
Sure.
Okay. Well, too often Christians see the 7-year time period, they know, but it's not any random year. It can't start today. It can't start, on any Rosh Hashanah. It has to begin the first year of a Shemitah cycle.
So the next year being the beginning of a Shemitah cycle and Jubilee.
Exactly.
I mean, that's
huge.
just huge.
This is huge.
Yeah. And so when you talk about the Shemitah year, you're going by the Jewish calendar.
Of course. And
yes.
The way we know it's a Shemitah year is the Hebrew years divisible by 7. It's really simple.
Yeah. And I heard you say that one time and it embarrassed me. It was so simple. I was like, why didn't I think of that? But so next year is a huge, huge year. And that's what you're saying. Yeah.
I tell you what, all your listeners need to get ready.
Is an astronomer with the Ontario Science Centre. He joins us in studio to break it all down. So good to see you again, Ryan. First off, take us through this. A supermoon itself is not uncommon, but what makes this one significant?
Well, the supermoon is when the moon reaches its closest point to the Earth for the entire year. We know the moon orbits the Earth once a month, and so every month it reaches its closest point called perigee and its furthest point called apogee. But for the year, tonight will be at its closest for the whole year, the supermoon.
Wow.
And it just happens that we have an eclipse going on at the same time, which is incredible.
Really cool stuff.
September 2015, all 193 UN member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. They recognize that ending poverty calls for transforming our world through strategies that build economic growth, address social needs, and ensure environmental protection. To achieve this vision, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, known as SDGs, were defined as part of the 2030 Agenda. The SDGs and their targets balance the 3 dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental, working in partnerships and calling for action by all countries. The goals are integrated and indivisible. To capture the broad scope of the SDGs, 5 core principles have been included in the 2030 Agenda. The 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. They underline the importance of eradicating poverty and hunger in all its forms, offering prosperity for all, and ensuring the protection of the planet and its natural resources. They emphasize a world where peace and human rights are realized for everyone, and where all countries and stakeholders act in collaborative partnerships to achieve sustainable development. These core principles also define the political priorities of the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, when collaborating with its partner countries. The Ministry calls for Germany to fulfill its global responsibility, advocates leaving no one behind, and promotes approaches balancing the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. An example of how this